Fighting fantasy, a staple of the 80s. If you were a kid in the 80s, you had at least one fighting fantasy book. But let's have a deeper look into it. Hello, welcome to What Is, a series where we take a game and ask the question, what is it? So, what is fighting fantasy? Fighting Fantasies is a series of single-player game books originally written by Steve Jackson, not to be confused with another American game designer of the same name, and Ian Livingstone. Later released books were written by various other authors, and the first book was published in 1982. The system mixed the choose-your-own adventure mechanic with dice rolling RPG elements. To discuss the history of fighting fantasy, we need to first talk about the series creators Steve Jackson and Ian Livingstone. Now, if these names seem familiar to you, and they should, it's because they are the co-founders of Games Workshop, now one of the biggest games companies on the planet. Back in 1974, Steve was working as a freelance journalist for a publication called Games and Puzzles magazine, which, strangely enough, was a magazine about games and puzzles. This was started back in 1972, and around this time he was flat sharing with two of his school friends in Shepherd's Bush, London. These friends were John Peake and Ian Livingstone. The three of them decided they wanted to make a games company, and so in early 1975 formed a company called Games Workshop, so called because the name would reflect the fact they would be crafting their games by hand. In order to support the newly founded business, they published Owl and Weasel, which was a monthly newsletter covering the games that they would produce. This was sort of a precursor to the later released White Dwarf magazine. The first issue of Owl and Weasel was released in February 1975 and was published until April 1977. The first issue was sent to subscribers of the fanzine Albion, which at the time had just ceased being made. One of the recipients of this was Brian Bloom, another name you may recognise if you're into RPGs and tabletop gaming. He was the business partner of Gary Gygax, the co-creator of Dungeons & Dragons at TSR Inc. So in return for receiving Owl and Whistle, Brian sent Steve a copy of Dungeons & Dragons. Steve Jackson and Ian Livingstone fell in love with the game, both thinking it more imaginative than anything available in the UK at the time. They both worked out an agreement with Brian to import and sell the game across Europe. By late 1975, Ian and Steve were organising their first convention, which would be called Games Day. During this time, they had been selling their products directly out the flat, but by the summer of 1976, the summer in which I was born, the landlord kicked them out because people were constantly turning up there expecting it to be an actual shop. It was also in 1976 that John Peake decided to leave the company, having no real interest in role-playing games and the like, which Games Workshop was getting more and more involved with. Now there was only one thing for it: to open their own shop, and so in April 1978 the first Games Workshop store opened at 1 Darling Road, Hammersmith, London. In 1980, Steve Jackson and Ian Livingstone attended one of their Games Day conventions and met with Geraldine Cook, who was an editor at Penguin Books. They both persuaded her to publish a book about the role-playing hobby. Originally intended to be an introductory guide, the idea changed to be more of an interactive game book. After several months, Cook thought the idea was a viable one and so commissioned Steve and Ian to develop it further. Their first submission was called Magic Quest, and it was a short adventure to show the style of the game. This was accepted by Penguin Books, and they both spent another 6 months expanding upon and improving their concept. The end result was Warlock of Firetop Mountain and was published in 1982 by Puffin Books, a children's imprint of Penguin. The original cover of the book was illustrated by Peter Andrew Jones, with the interior illustrations by Russ Nicholson. The first printing of the book was for 5,000 copies, but these quickly sold out, leading to further printing runs. There was now a demand for more books, and so Steve and Ian wrote the next 2 books separately in 1983, and The Citadel of CHAOS and The Forest of Doom were published. 4 more books quickly followed. These were Starship Traveller, the first science fiction setting, The City of Thieves, Death Trap Dungeon, and Island of the Lizard King. By 1984, the decision had been made to hire more authors to help with the demand, and the first to be hired were Steve Jackson, the American games designer. After that came Andrew Chapman, Carl Sargent aka Keith Martin, Mark Gascoigne and Peter DeVille Evans. Whilst they would have less to do with the books, both Steve and Ian would have approval of all art, both on the cover and the internal illustrations, at least in the UK. When Warlock Firetop Mountain was first released in 1982, it had a wraparound cover design, and that would be a one-off design for the series. The first unified design of the books, beginning in 1983, had the books with multicoloured spines with unique covers. On the front cover, in the same colour as the spine, the book number was printed in a star. The first 7 books were printed using this design. The next set of reprints, including the first 7 books, all had green spines, and at the top a green zigzag frame was added that contained the Puffin logo on the left hand side, Adventure Gamebook text in the middle, and the gamebook number on the far right hand side. The first book to get this design was The Scorpion Swamp in 1984. In 1987, starting with the release of Beneath Nightmare Castle, the dragon cover was used. This featured a large box with a gold dragon at the top of the cover containing the cover credit. The spines remained the same green as the previous design. All older books previously released were re-released using this design. There would be minor design changes, but the overall look remained the same. Changes would include the strange removal of the book numbers, only for them to be reprinted and have the book numbers reinstated. Up until the 52nd book, the text in the gold dragon was done in a bronze foil, whereas after this it was printed in using normal ink. Steve Jackson, the UK one, would go on to write the 4-part Sorcery series from 1983 to 1985. This was a more advanced system using many of the core concepts of fighting fantasy, but added a new magic system. These books would also add 2 pictures of dice at the bottom pages, so if you flip through the pages randomly you can roll 2 dice. This would later be placed in all books when they got republished by Wizard Books. In 1986, Andrew Chapman and Martin Allen wrote a 2-part 2-player variation called The Clash of Princes. There's also a lot of supplementary material released too, such as Fighting Fantasy, the introductory role-playing game, and Advanced Fighting Fantasy, which used the core system but added more to it to make it more of a fully fledged RPG system. Also Titan, which covered the world where most of the books were set, and Out of the Pit, which detailed a lot of the monsters that featured in the books. There's also 3 illustrated novels released: The Trolltooth Wars by Steve Jackson, Demon Stealer by Mark Gascoigne, and finally Shadowmaster by Ian Livingstone and Mark Gascoigne. Unfortunately, I only own the first 2 of these, but I am planning on tracking down the 3rd book and have been rereading the others in preparation. By the 1990s, the sales had begun to decline, possibly due to the increase in computer game sales. The end of the series was planned to be Return to Firetop Mountain, which would have been book 50 and was released in 1992. This book sold well enough for the decision to be made to publish a further 10 books, but only 9 of these was published at the time, and the series ended with The Curse of the Mummy in 1995. The unpublished 10th book, BLOODBONES, would see publication the following decade by Wizard Books. In 2002, Wizard Books acquired the rights to publish fighting fantasy books and reprinted the original titles, those written by Steve and Ian, albeit in a slightly revised order. The first book to be released was Warlock Firetop Mountain. They also incorporated Steve Jackson's sorcery into the series. The books featured a new cover art, but the internal illustrations remained the same. In 2005, a brand new story was published, The Eye of the Dragon, written by Ian Livingstone. And in 2006, the previously unreleased BLOODBONES saw the light of day. In 2007, another new book, The Howl of the Werewolf, was published. 2007 was also the 25th anniversary of Fighting Fantasy, and a special hardcover version of Warlock of Firetop Mountain was released using its original 1982 cover. It contained a few extras, such as a walkthrough for the game and a commentary on Fighting Fantasy by Ian Livingstone. The same year, the series concluded with the release of 29 books. In 2009, Wizard reprinted the books but with a slightly different cover, once again starting with Warlock of Firetop Mountain. These books were slightly larger than the previous releases. During this run, 3 new titles got published: Stormslayer, Night of the Necromancer and Blood of the Zombies. This series run came to an end in 2012. The most recent time for fighting fantasy is by Scholastic Books, releasing a brand new title, The Portal of Peril, in 2017 to mark the 35th anniversary of the series. They also released 5 of the original titles: Warlock of Firetop Mountain, City of Thieves, Citadel of Chaos, Forest of Doom and House of Hell. In April 2018, a further 6 books were released, including another new one, The Gates of Death, written by Charlie Higson of the Fast Show fame. 3 more titles are set to release in 2019, including another new book by Ian Livingstone entitled Assassins of Alanzia. These releases had all new cover art and unfortunately replaced the interior art with what was called a more modern approach, and I have to say I don't like the style at all, finding it bland and uninteresting. Most of the game books were set in the world of Titan, which is made up of 3 main continents, Alanzia, HOWL and the Old World. Warhammer Fantasy Battle players might recognise the name the Old World. It's not the same place but shares many of the same conventions, both due to having a strong Games Workshop connection, I guess. Alanzia is the largest out of the 3 continents and perhaps the one most familiar to fighting fantasy books, with 23 of the 59 titles being set there. HOWL is located on the south of the world and is sometimes called the Dark Continent due to the dark, almost black nature of the soil and rocks. The Old World is the most civilised of the 3 continents and the setting of Steve Jackson's Sorcery series. I think at one point I might do a video covering the world of Titan in more detail. Each book may have a slight variation, but the basic premise to all the games remains the same. First, you're going to need to roll up your skill, stamina and luck, these attributes that are going to be used throughout the game. To begin with, you roll 1 die, add 6 to this number and enter this total in the skill box on your adventure sheet. Next, roll 2 dice, add 12 to this number and enter this total in the stamina box. Next, roll another single die, add 6 to this number and this is your luck, and write this on your character sheet. Combat is relatively straightforward. You roll 2 dice for the creature, add its skill score and this is the creature's attack strength. Next you roll 2 dice for yourself, add your skill score and this is your attack strength. If your attack strength is higher than that of the creature, you have wounded it. If the creature's attack strength is higher than yours, it's wounded you. If both are the same, you sort of parried and you go back to the first step where you roll 2 dice and add the creature's strength. If you have wounded the creature, you subtract 2 points from its stamina score. You can use your luck where you can do some additional damage. If the creature wounds you, you subtract 2 from your stamina score. Again, you can use luck at this stage, which we'll cover in a minute, to do less damage to you. And then you repeat these steps to either you're dead or the creature's dead. Certain combats will give you an opportunity to escape, but in doing so the creature gets 1 attack on you, so you'd automatically lose 2 stamina points. At various times in the game you can test your luck. To test your luck, you roll 2 dice. If that number is equal to or less than your current luck score, you've been lucky and you've succeeded. If not, you've been unlucky. Each time you test your luck in this manner, you deduct 1 from your luck, so it's getting harder and harder to chance fate. As mentioned in combat earlier, you can use your luck in battle. So if you've just wounded the creature, you can test your luck as just been described, and if you are lucky, you inflict an extra 2 points of damage. Again, you have to deduct your luck score, and likewise, if you've been wounded, you can do the same to restore 1 point of stamina if you've lost it. So if you lose 2 points, you only lose 1. Luck, skill and stamina never normally goes above its starting value. Throughout the games, different games handle this in different ways. Some will give you provisions to start the game with, where if you eat one you can restore stamina. Others will give you potions where you can pick a potion of skill, a potion of strength, or a potion of fortune, and you can only take one, but each one will restore your skill, stamina, or luck back to its starting level. And that is the basic core mechanics of the game. Apart from that, what will happen is you'll start on page 1 or section 1, you'll read that, and then it will give you options. So you can read it, and it will say, do you want to go west? So you turn to this number, or east, and you turn to this number, and you flip through the book till you find that number to actually do things. And it's that simple to play. The Scholastic books are widely available in all good bookshops, including Amazon. I have included some links to them in the description. The previous editions from Puffin and Wizard books are available on the second-hand market. The Puffin books can go for a few pounds depending on quality. The most expensive seem to be the later release books. I guess they didn't get as many reprints and they're less rarer. A board game designed by Steve Jackson, released in 1986 by Games Workshop. Based upon the book, the players navigated a maze and overcome monsters in a bid to be the first to open the Warlock's treasure chest. In 1993, Legend of Zargol was released by Parker Brothers. I'm planning a separate What Is video for this, so I'll cover that more at a later date. There have been several video games released over the years, including 7 fighting fantasy titles, the Warlock Firetop Mountain, the CITADEL of CHAOS, the Forest of Doom, the Temple of Terror, the Seas of Blood, Appointment with Fear, and Rebel Planet, and these were released for the Commodore 64, Amstrad, BBC, and Sinclair ZX Spectrum in around 1984. For me, the most notable was Death Trap Dungeon for the PC and PlayStation by Eidos Interactive in 1998. On 18th of August 2011, an adaptation of Talisman of Death was released by UK developer Laughing Jackal for the PlayStation Minis platform, playable on PlayStation Portable and PlayStation 3. Inkle, a Cambridge-based studio, released another interactive version of the Shamanti Hills for iOS in May 2013, and has since gone on to release all 4 parts of Sorcery on iOS, Android, Windows and Mac. The video game Warlock Firetop Mountain Goblin Scourge Edition was released by Tin Man Games for the Nintendo Switch on the 13th of September 2018. And speaking of Tin Man Games, they have also released Fighting Fantasy Classic video games for Windows. BLOODBONES is available for free, and other titles available as paid DLC. And we are going to be playing House of Hell for Halloween month, which is what this video is leading up to. So that is what is fighting fantasy. I hope you have fun and a little look down nostalgia. It certainly was for me, because these were a big part of my childhood growing up. A little fantasy world I could take in my pocket. Thanks for watching and listening, guys. I hope you liked the video. If you do, if you can like it, share it and leave some comments for me, that'll be great. It will help the channel out. But until next time, guys, take care.